Right. Well, I'm going to start recording. So, well, why don't you? It's your show, so why don't you introduce us?
Yeah. So everyone, I'd like to welcome the one and only, the man, the myth, the legend. How I found him was doing research on the intellectual dark web, and he was called the pastor of the intellectual dark web by one commentary that I was reading, and I said, "Well, that's an interesting position to have." So I wanted to seek you out, and our first conversation went so well, I wanted to have you back and say, welcome to my channel.
Well, thank you.
I think I have 5 subscribers right now, and I think 4 of them are Russian bots, and 1 of them is my mom. So I can't verify that, but we're looking into it right now.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, as far as I know, well, in fact, I do know none of the IDW members tithe, at least not to my church. So all those dramatically wealthy men haven't improved the prospects of my little church.
I hear you. Yes, you need to tell them.
That's right.
Like we discussed in our last conversation, you shouldn't be judged by what you drive. You should be judged by what your pastor drives. That's when
right.
You know
right.
you are really ascending the holy mount when your pastor's driving whatever he or she wants to. So
that's right.
Or in this day and age, even planes. So
that's right. Where's my private plane, huh? Let's pass the hat. Rogan, the Weinsteins, Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris. I want to see Sam Harris dig deep to give to the church.
Well, I started to channel my inner Sam Harris just to, let's do some house cleaning. Let's get some of this out of the way. And when people, like, if you're fans of Sam Harris, listen, I've been a huge fan of his for so many years. My doppelganger, the person that I would most like to be like, only channeling all of that for good, would have been Christopher Hitchens. I really miss his spirit, his spunk, and just how loquacious he was. And missed he gave it to Christians. I mean, he didn't pull any cards for anyone really. And so I really appreciate almost all of my friends are either atheists or agnostics. So I really appreciate all of the commentary that they do, because I think it helps us. It's actually a weird environment where I think what we're seeing more of is that I'm not going to make a overgeneralization, but quite a few religious people, they've been so used to ridicule in classrooms that it's just sort of like, okay, well, that's the best you got. And I hear you say that all the time. You're not going to break me by saying something you think is offensive. I've heard worse, probably from someone in my own church. So go for it. But, I wanted to start off, a lot of people they've given you compliments for things that I think are deeply meaningful. And it's all of those things, I would echo them, but I would add one more line of appreciation it's so banal that anyone that is watching YouTube videos, can I just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for not making ridiculous thumbnails that might get you more views, but that aren't just like, I don't know what the algorithm is doing with that. And so I can just assure everyone that's watching that the thumbnail for this won't be Paul paused making some kind of weird face. For the life of me, I don't get that. And I don't know why that's a thing that goes on.
Well, it's funny because on the church channel where I just post sermons and Sunday school lessons, the stills, the thumbnails that Google itself makes are always, the most dramatic. And often when I'm making a thumbnail, so I take the video and I kind of go through it and I try to isolate a very pleasant picture. And some people just look pleasant a lot. And other people, like I did one this morning for Pete, my friend, and Pete's a very expressive guy like I am, and almost every still has him. He's sticking out his tongue, he's making the big eyes. I mean, so you make enough thumbnails, it's more challenging than you might imagine. So
yeah, I know that it's tripping an algorithm some way, or there's an anchoring effect whereby someone who's successful that's done it, and so people continue to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a segue there if I reach hard enough and say that I really am fascinated by this ecosystem that's been created around the meaning crisis. And I think you and I we have similar interests. We will diverge at certain places, but we have similar interests. And I did want to get your take really quickly on what you think the process is, because I hear you saying that one of the things that you do is you build community. So as quickly as you could say, it's not about me, it's about building this thing for us, and then you guys go off and do your thing, and we'll do something together. Could you just say something about what do you think is happening right now? Because I think I sent you in the email, Stephen Johnson has this idea that part of what spurred on a lot of the innovation that happened just prior to the Enlightenment was that people began meeting in coffee houses. So one, they stopped being drunk all day. That helped. Mm-hmm. They started ingesting lots of stimulants. That helped. Mm-hmm. But then they got together, and as they say, they had these promiscuous conversations. That's where ideas went to have, it was their conjugal bed. And mm-hmm. So I feel like something similar is happening here. And I don't know that we get to the Enlightenment, but I am curious just to see what you think is happening with that.
Well, before the Reformation, before the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, similar things were happening. They were called conventicles, where, you had the mass and the church and all of that, but people were meeting together in homes. And what were they doing when they're meeting together in homes? They're unsupervised, in a sense, by the church authorities, and they're speaking. Well, what is it? Okay, so they're unsupervised. What does that mean? It means they're speaking freely. It means they're saying what's on their mind and saying what's on their heart. And lately I've been thinking, so we've got sort of the Vervaeke thing going over here. How does that connect up with the IDW? Well, I think, part of what the briefly imagined IDW was about, in a sense, was people speaking freely. And Eric Weinstein made the comment that, almost everyone in that group has enough money so that they're not going to get in trouble with their boss. And one of the things that I've noted is that even though churches rightly have a reputation for being rather authoritarian filters on speech, now compared to other spaces in the culture, churches are relatively free. And, that perhaps comes from a sense of desperation in some ways that churches are experiencing. But I think it's true that most major advances, they're probably recalibrations that people and institutions have to do because of contextual changes, can only happen if you can engage this collective consciousness, as it were, collective wisdom, which happens when we're all talking back and forth. And so I've said it a number of times, the thing I am most pleased with in terms of the response to my videos is not necessarily the subscriber number, but the amount of other quality conversations that seem to be going on without me. Because part of what happens with a celebrity culture is, and we've seen this happen with Jordan Peterson, and we'll see what happens in the near future. But so you listen to Jordan Peterson, you listen to talk, at a certain point, you kind of have his shtick. And most people aren't that creative. And so once you kind of learn what they're going to say, you've kind of learned what they said. And this happens with preachers all the time. It used to be in the Christian Reformed Church, preachers were in for 4 to 7 years. And about that time, they'd take another call and preachers would say, I turn the sermon barrel over and I start, working through my shtick again. Well, people, once they listen to me enough, and plenty of people have listened to me plenty, well, you kind of have me scoped out. And so by that point, okay, you're looking for new stuff to listen to. And so actually, I think if I want to be helpful, the best thing I can do, and probably the most influential thing I can do, is to foster and encourage a whole bunch of other conversations that they'll disagree with me about this and they'll disagree with that, but there's enough of a thread between them that we're all sort of working on the same stuff. And, when I look at some of the others who have started their own YouTube channels, I look at what Mary is doing with her channel. I look at what Karen Wong is doing with her channel. I look at what Job is doing in the Discord server. And I can't do all that. I'm just one person. I haven't started an institution that pays everyone to do that. Even that can be problematic. But when you've got individuals doing it freely, unconstrained, I can't shut any of their YouTube channels down. Good things happen.
It's so strange, that you mentioned that about the church being, interestingly, maybe in some ways paradoxically, what rhetoricians, comps, people might call this epidictic place where you come and you're creating an openness there for people to share. And personally, I resonated intensely with your conversation with Christopher Mastropietro, because you could see that this look ahead function, he had to perform it, and he had to negotiate what reputational harm might be. And so there's this concept of the spiral of silence, where you don't say what it is you truly think and believe. And perhaps the media goes with a particular agenda. There's agenda setting is actually, there's an argument about whether or not it's an actual theory, but it's not just me saying like, oh, the media has an agenda. In the discipline of communication, there is an agenda setting theory. And so they go with their narrative and their theory, and if no one goes against it, then one of the unifying things that makes a nation is that you have shared information. And so the spiral of silence gets created where no one says anything. So everyone either starts to believe that it's true, or they're silent. And so the media just keep going. No one's correcting us, so we must be right. And I think we really sort of stumbled into that in a terrible way in 2016. And it grieves me, because I understand where he was coming from when he said, this is nerve-wracking. And so for someone who's talked for a living and written for a living, and you're putting ideas out there, a lot of it is careful. And so when I was doing something very similar to him, he said he was doing public policy. The last thing on earth I could do was afford to have social media of any sort. Yeah. The last thing you wanted was to be called into the principal's office. And I told my wife, you can get called into the principal's office a few times and it'd be a good thing, but one too many times and it's a terrible thing. Yeah. And so I really respect the fact that what I think I'm seeing more of, and it took a few people to be out front to say, okay, maybe there's going to be reputational harm. I'm doing the look ahead function, and this is probably going to cost me something. But if I don't do anything, it's going to cost me perhaps more. And having had a baby recently, well, my wife had the baby. I am a baby. And so I think it compelled me to say, geez, Am I comfortable just sitting in an office, writing these things, reading these things, maybe lecturing, but even that's constrained in a way that I was doing this seminar on bioethics, and again, this is a public university, lots of students, and you're free to sign up. And this is my own version of a trigger warning, is to say, look, we're going to cover some really difficult material here, but we're going to follow the protocol that, as a clinician, that I learned in terms of building group dynamics. You're going to get to know me. You're going to see how I facilitate things before we get into the meat of the material. And all along the way, you're going to be getting to know one another. And so you're going to start to trust each other. That's what we're trying to do, is build an atmosphere where things can be said and you can risk saying the wrong thing, maybe even something offensive. And the best thing about that is when you have a trusting environment and you as the professor, you don't have to correct the student, because the actual group itself becomes the container, and they can say, well, I don't know if I go that far. And that actually helps the student modulate better than if I said it just sounds like I'm coming down on them. And so around, I guess, 2014, 15-ish is when people started questioning whether or not I should even do the class anymore. Because you do get into some intense things like the Tuskegee experiment here in the US, and then obviously eugenics and afterbirth abortion, just very hot button issues. And I was like, why would you not do that? This is a liberal institution. And everyone in the room turned and looked at me like, what? What do you mean? I was like, this is a bastion of free speech, right? I mean, this is the university. This is where we say things. And the tenured professors looked at me like I was crazy. Like, no. And so I did come to find that it has become this peculiar environment now where, and I think that people that criticize Peterson for focusing on what's going on in academia, well, that's his context.
Yeah.
And so he's just talking about his life and his context.
Yeah.
Whatever your room is that you need to clean that. But he's talking about his room is the classroom.
Yeah.
And so I've seen that this one episode where I had a student that kept coming in late and sitting at the very front of the class. And we have this huge lecture hall. There's hundreds of students. And he walks right in front of the podium, right in front of, everything, disrupting. Students are trying to take quizzes. And so finally, even though it's in the syllabus, you sign up for it. People are trying to take a test, and it's up on the screen, and he's standing in the middle of it, casting a shadow. And if you want to get high anxiety, you get students who think, if I make a B on this test, they have this long chaining out process that they go through. If I make a B on the test, I won't make an A in the class. If I don't make an A in the class, I won't get into the grad school that I want. If I don't get into the grad school I want, I won't get the house and the family and the job and et cetera. So there's this really deep anxiety that they have. The stakes are so high.
Yep.
And in some ways, they're right.
Yeah.
And so I asked this young man, I was like, could you please go in from the back door? Because there's a back door at the top of the theater. You could just come down. You can sit at the back. Because these students are freaking out. They're raising it. Please tell him to move. And so he was just like, no, I'm going to sit right here. And so my unconditional positive regard was challenged. And so I was like, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside the classroom, and we'll talk in office hours, but you're going to need to excuse yourself. It was a very, no desks were thrown, No one was bodily injured. But, and what's so weird is after this, as the semester progressed, he came by and he talked to me. He was like, look, I was having a really rough time. Here's what was going on in my life. He ended up becoming one of the best students in the class.
Yeah.
And the strangest thing is it started because I was willing to call him on his disruption. He wanted attention. He was getting it. Was the bad kind. But at the end of the semester, out of about 200 students, probably a 10, maybe 15% commented on that incident from maybe like week 6. And they were like, it was so deeply uncomfortable. I can't believe he did that. And so there is something going on here where if you don't treat it, people act as if students don't graduate from universities and then inhabit institutions and organizations. So it's not as if it's going to stop there. And so, I mean, perhaps that, I don't know, you said that your congregation is, they are of a mature age, some of them. So I don't know how that's different, because if you ask them what constitutes a bad day, for my grandparents, it would be somebody died. Whenever I do the beginning of the year, we give out this it's a poll. It's kind of a survey to find out, what do you think the greatest inventions are? What's the greatest thing happening? What have been the greatest inventions? The iPhone, And so I asked my grandmother, I was like, what do you think the greatest invention is? She was like, antibiotics, polio vaccine. Those are crucial because she lost siblings from simple things like an abscess tooth. So there is this different dynamic at work. So I wonder if you could comment on that and the difference in going from a congregation that's sort of mature and have been through a world of things, and now dealing with perhaps maybe working professionals, but if you put a 20-year-old in the 40s up against a 20-year-old now, it might be really difficult to even compare those two identities.
Yeah, many of the members of this church, the oldest member just died recently. He was born in 1919, and he was just about 100 years old. Many of the members of this church were born just after the Second World War. We have a Japanese couple, both of whom were children in Japanese internment camps here in California. Part of people live long during different periods of time. So obviously, if you're in your 70s now, you lived through the end of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and so on and so forth. You do gain wisdom with age. And I think a big factor in our current, as you were talking, I was thinking about the fact that part of what creates a totalitarian system are the carrots and sticks that the system uses to encourage compliance. And I think part of what's happened in our society is that increasingly the institutions in which people live their lives are fundamentally employment institutions. With the decline of churches, and this has been written about, Putnam wrote about it, Bowling Alone, with the decline of a lot of voluntary organizations, the spaces in which people are with non-family members are increasingly work or commercial institutions. And so the decline of churches means that people are constantly having to, like you said, with a student, they get a B on this quiz that leads to a whole series of dominoes that they imagine, which will affect their trajectory on an ever increasingly economically polarized society, where the benefits of becoming an elite are increasingly tremendous, and the limitations for not being in that group are increasingly restrictive. And so so now, well, you better please the professor. Now, if you're, and what people imagine is, okay, if I get an A on this quiz, then I'll be set. Oh no, you have to keep getting A's. Okay, well then once I get that, once I get into that degree program, once I'm in that PhD program, then I'll be free. Oh no, then you've got to please, and it just keeps going along. Whereas, and I think churches, when they were a more vibrant part of our society, when the stakes were higher, you had more of those dynamics, and for better or for worse. So to actually be disciplined by a church right now, in most churches, the only people that actually get disciplined by a church are pastors. And you can again see the employment connection there.
Sure.
Because members aren't disciplined in churches anymore, either because, number one, the church doesn't want to lose any financial benefit that the church gets by them being faithful in the church, or two, people just simply leave and go to another church, and usually an independent church, and then, or stop going to church at all. So the context in which we are relating to one another has changed. And the internet, where it was supposed to bring freedom, well, now in the internet, we've seen both sides of that freedom. I was on Twitter today, and you don't have to be on Twitter long, and you read things, and it's like, yeah, there's some things that I would have thought but not have said, and you get that echo chamber of all these anonymous accounts. One of the things that happened fairly quickly on the Discord server that some people from our meetup connected was, very quickly in that culture, it became a value to use your real name. Because what that did in the community was say, okay, now if you flame someone or troll someone, people will know who you are. And if you're in that server using a pseudonym or a nickname or a fake name or something, you lose status, because people aren't going to take you quite so seriously. But if you use your real name, well, now you've got skin in the game, and maybe we can have a productive conversation.
I think that's a great point. That's the other side of the coin, is no reputational harm is not necessarily what we want. And so I don't think I closed the loop. So what I meant to say was that was what they were afraid of. The professors and my colleagues were afraid of, for me, is that there would be reputational harm.
That's right.
And at the same time, so listening to what Christopher said, I was like, geez, that's so bad that we can't have conversations where you're not trying to be offensive, you're not trying to say anything, to malign someone, and that is a fear. And so we're trying to break through that. I think that's at least what seeing people like, that was the one thing that Peterson always said, is like, go look at how many lectures do I have? And then watching Vervaeke, and I read a comment to one of his podcasts, and it said something like, we're here, we're waiting, put your lectures out there. We're hungry for this kind of information. And so it really is surprising in that way that we've gotten to a point. And I do think that things like this are starting to shift it. Just if you're in your local community, you can say, well, there will be reputational harm if you don't put skin in the game. And just a funny anecdote about, you might find this funny as a pastor, because we were on vacation one year, and again, no, I am from the South, so you have to give me some leeway here. We were on vacation, so we didn't know anyone there. It was a Sunday, and so just the closest church to us, we just went. Mm-hmm. And it just so happens that out of seeming nowhere for us, we had no context for this, they were going to take up an offering. And so they asked, deacons of the church, come down and grab the coffers and say a prayer, an offertory hymn, etc. And before doing so, one of the deacons said, "Pastor, one moment. There's something that I need to confess." And he starts telling about how he's struggling with alcohol and how he's been dealing with it for years. And worse than the dealing with it was that he felt like he was dealing with it in silence, and that if he said anything, there would be such, he didn't use these words, reputational harm, but there would be such a punitive response that he couldn't.
Yeah.
And so the pastor, I thought he handled it pretty well. He said, well, the Bible does say that we should confess our sins one to another. He said, but folks, I'm also going to have to ask you for an apology. He said, because as our deacon was saying that, I was saying inside myself, oh Lord, please don't share that. Don't share that. And so, I do think that it's fascinating that we are sort of at maybe a strategic inflection point in that regard where so when I was researching you, I was wondering, I was like, so is this like the Tim Keller of like edgier atheists? Like is Paul Vanderklay like what Tim Keller is to, all of these other people? Because one of the things that's promoted about him is that he's sort of a friend to the atheists, he's atheist friendly. And I would certainly consider myself in that number, because I get the sense. So I think we can segue here to the conversations that you've had with John Vervaeke and Chris Mastropietro, that they're not anti-theists.
No.
And this image, I think everyone that heard, and I don't know how he wants to be referred to as Chris or Christopher or Mastropietro, but this idea of this dying star receding, it was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really, really, sure, yeah, the mytho-poet came out.
Yes,
and
yes.
We see that he has a gift for rhapsodizing in these ways. And the thing is, though, and when John's lecturing, he has such a deep reverence for really all faiths.
Yeah.
But really makes a strong case for why you don't know your grammar. And this is a point that Kenneth Burt makes, that there are these God terms in your culture, in your society. It's how meaning is made. You're shaped and constrained by the terms that you're able to use. And so watching them talk about these things, but be so seemingly upset about it, sad about it. And that's one of the things that Chris did express, was that, I'm not happy about this,
right?
That it's
right.
receding.
Right.
And so before I go on, I just like, what was your immediate visceral reaction to that?
Well, it was a very powerful mythopoetic moment, and it was a very powerful image. And John has made a similar comment all throughout his lectures, that to return to something like historic Christianity is nostalgic. I was just working on an outline for a video on the question of whether God is actually the ancient answer to the frame problem, long before the frame problem was imagined. Because as I work through all of this stuff from Peterson and Vervaeke and all the other voices around, you can see. So for example, in our culture, we have this problem. Okay, so in the 80s and 90s, there was a response to, let's say totalitarian Christendom, the waning of totalitarian Christendom. My favorite example of that is from the old TV sitcom My Name is Earl. And my favorite episode of that was called White Lie Christmas, where Earl's ex's mother had a gambling problem, and she was just devastating the whole family with her gambling problem. And every time someone said, wait a minute, why is there no money in the family bank account? Don't you judge me. I mean, all throughout the whole story was, don't you judge me. And so we had this moment of, okay, total acceptance. And now then early in the teens now, it kind of flipped. And now it's, well, this Hollywood person had a tweet that can be now understood in such and such a way. I don't know why nobody's taken a shot at Hillary Clinton for waiting for till 2013 to affirm same-sex marriage. So now suddenly, don't let anyone get away with anything. And we're holding people in their 50s and 60s applying for jobs for things that they did when they were in college dorms. And it's like, wow, we went from don't you judge me to zero tolerance on everything. And so when you look at this, and especially if you've lived your life in a church context, you're always, because you have this tradition of forgiveness, you begin to have an understanding of the weight of forgiveness. And again, in this individualistic society, most people don't wait around to experience either end of the relationship that forgiveness requires and in fact builds. But every now and then someone does. And that deacon in the church was testing the institution to say, okay, every day here we hear about Jesus dying for our sins and that there's forgiveness and all that. I want to know if it's real. And it's such obviously a needed factor if, on one hand, you are going to be able to hold people to certain standards that the community requires and not kill them for standing in front of the overhead projector, Yeah. And so one of the things that I think is misunderstood when I hear and see people, first of all, we all judge the world from our context, from our point of view. And I was talking to one of my friends from the meetup who has been coming to church, and we had, the church, we have a bunch of older people in our church, and we hadn't stripped and waxed the sanctuary floor for about 12 or 14 years. And we used to do that every other year, and it was a mess. And so a bunch of guys from the meetup came with one or two of us from the church, and we did it together. And so my friend who's been coming to church just says to me, I think things are changing. I think things are changing. Well, that's his view from here. So in some places, the sun might look like it's receding. Other people see it as coming. And throughout the history of the Christian church, this has happened multiple times. And where Christianity seems forgotten, the churches are empty, everyone's abandoning it, and then something happens and whoosh, it springs to life again. Now, because you start watching one YouTube, Google feeds you all kinds of other ones. Lately I've seen a string of YouTubes that basically say, religion, it's finally over. And I just think, I'll tell you, it's been counted out many times. We'll see. So, but at the same time, and when people hear me say that, they hear me say that as a Christian minister who has bias, tribal bias. At the same time, I think people in the church need to deeply appreciate the dilemma that people many of the people that I talk to regularly now have, where they just don't feel it. And I understand that. I had a conversation in the Discord server with a woman who is a missionary in an Islamic country in West Africa. And one of the things that's happening in terms of Christian Islamic mission is that they have this scale of, well, at what level of action or propositional confession do we regard someone as a Christian? I mean, if they're still going to the mosque, and you go through all of these steps, because many of the people in the Islamic world, there are high costs for stepping out of that religious community. It's deeply embedded all around them. But if they say, well, yeah, I'm a Muslim, but I believe in Jesus, is that enough? Does that count? And of course, one of my favorite stories is from the book of Kings, where Naaman, who is this wonderful story how he's delivered from leprosy, and then he asks, I better get it right. He asks Elisha, now I'm going back, and I'm the servant of the king of Aram, of Syria, and I have to accompany him into the temple. And when he bows his knee, I'm right on his arm, and I have to bow my knee too. Will the God who delivered me from leprosy understand? And Elisha says, yes, don't worry about it. And so, Job, is probably the most transparent example of this. They're calling him the pastor on the Discord channel, and he's joined a church in his town in the Netherlands, and he's promoting his church, and he's doing all these things. He says, yeah, it's the God thing I'm not so sure about. But, and it's like, well, this is funny. Well, what are we going to do? Well, I say we continue to work it. So is the sun receding? Maybe it looks that way to you. Things can be very strange in this line of work.
Yeah, there's so many things that hit me just then as you're saying it. I mean, one of the first things that I would say is, I don't know how many times, so if I guess one of the advantages of having some academics around is that they can, I noticed that one of the things that you do to hedge is you say, I'm not a scholar, I'm not an academic, I'm just a pastor. And I do the same thing. Like, I'm not a pastor, I'm not a preacher, but in our own way. Like Richard Wever said it many years ago, all language is sermonic. And so when Chris said that about, he pegged Peterson and said he's kind of a preacher. It's exactly right level of analysis, because that's what comm scholars have been saying for a long time. It's your language is sermonic. You're trying to get people to your side. So when you say that, people say, oh, it's because you have tribal bias. Here's the thing. You're at least doing what in academia, even the most touted postmodernists would want you to do. So if I look at someone like Donna Haraway, she wrote Situated Knowledges, and there you're just talking about what is your bias. Put that thing out there, and once we know where your biases are, we can start to have a conversation, and I know how to interpret that. I think, and there's the problem of speaking for others, where some of these issues are challenged. But I think, like, it just hit me in my gut when you were saying that about the ups and downs of the church. Maybe that's one reason why you're an important figure right now, and people like you. And maybe that's one of the things, I never thought about this before, but maybe that's one of the reasons why Jesus was able to sleep in the boat during the storm, is that he was well aware of the ups and downs, the vicissitudes of life and faith. And And so it didn't worry him. And so while many of us are sort of, biting our fingernails, not knowing what's coming, someone who's very comfortable in their faith, who knows their election is sure, that rubs off on people. And when I was growing up, the pastor from many of my formative years, I hadn't seen him in so long. And my wife and I, we were visiting my parents. And of all places, I had gone to pick up some groceries for them. And I ran into my old pastor. And his goal was always to preach until he was 80. And so he's getting close. And I mean, listen, this guy was preaching to me right there in the aisles. I mean, he didn't care who heard him, had so much joy just seeping out of him. So much assurance, not self-assurance, not arrogance, not cockiness. And when he walked away, I'm pretty sure I said this out loud. I was just walking down the aisle, shaking my head like, one, that was out of nowhere, but two, this man knows God. Like, it was this weird, like, he doesn't know about God. He knows God. There's a very different kind of residue about that. And for any of your listeners that have never followed Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, I really recommend that, because he used to do this annual thing in the UK when he was the head rabbi there, where he would go and talk to leading atheists. And what I noticed over time is that when he would talk to them, maybe they were angry at first. Maybe they had a really important point. For instance, a Jewish person saying, where was God during the Holocaust? And he really entertains that question and says, there's no making light of this. But the way he handled it, with such assurance in this providential nature of God, you could see something about the people starting to kind of melt a little bit and say, well, like, man, at least one of us is still hanging in there. Yeah. And I think that does installations of hope. People are looking for that, and they're looking for people that are just not lying to them by saying, I believe this thing is real. I've put all my chips in on this. Yeah. Like I've prayed that many times, like, God, if you're not real, I'm screwed, man, because I've put all my chips in here. Like, I got nowhere else to go. Yeah. Where do we go? You have the words of eternal life. If you don't, man, we're in trouble. Yeah. The other thing about what you said about in the Islamic world, one of my best friends, so I was blessed. I just had a wild collegiate experience where almost all of my roommates, except for two of them who are my closest friends, were international students. And one of them was a very active, militant member of a particular organization that may or may not be labeled a terrorist organization at this time. And I want to be careful what I say so there's no identifying information, but he was wealthy, very wealthy. And the kind of wealth that they deal with makes the kind of, like, you're a little rich, you can do. No, that's the difference between the story of giving you a golf club and you expecting a club in the mail and in fact getting a deed to a golf club. Right. That's the difference. Right. And so over a course of, I don't know, maybe 2 years, he was paired with the head of the Baptist Campus Ministries. You can't make this stuff up. Eventually, he became a Christian. And he had so much animosity. His family was displaced, and that's trauma. And you gotta recognize that that's a real thing. And so when you say about experiencing forgiveness, they've been carrying such anger and hostility for so long that it just became a way of being.
Yeah.
And the first opportunity he had to really think that through and shed it, it wasn't as if he did it lightly because he knew the stakes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When he graduated, I won't say what country he went back to, but his job was to be a teacher for very higher up adolescents. And he went from being a guy here in the States that could do and buy whatever he wanted to. And he sent me the saddest message one day via Skype. And he was like, hey, man, can you smuggle me some Christian music? Because he was a musician.
Wow.
And he was like, look, we got to do it like buy an MP3 player, load it on the MP3 player, put the MP3 player back in the packaging, don't make it look like it's been opened, let there be no, just put it in like brown paper. Like there can't be anything about it.
Wow.
Or they will kill me, man. And I was just like,
yeah.
This is, I mean, the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
So when you say to me, if a person over there is like, yeah, I'm still Muslim, I believe in Jesus too. That may sound like a contradiction, but listen, hey, let them work that out. I'm not going to judge that at all. Like the stakes for that, a lot of us imagine that we'd be one of the Elliots, and we just say, here, just put the arrow right here if you need to, working with these populations that have never been served or reached with that particular message. But I found myself in Tegucigalpa saying, God, are you serious? This is how I'm going to die? Please don't let this be the way that I die like this. Like this is just absolutely absurd. And so I thought, you put a gun to my head, and I never did it. False. I'm going to go ahead and say it's not about belief. It was about, I still had this notion of projecting myself into the future. I had things I wanted to do. I wasn't ready to die. But another story is one of my closest friends is from India. He was my roommate, and he's a Sikh. And talk about missionary dating. He was one of the most popular guys on campus because he had this long hair. He took off his turban, which was kind of like, for his family. They were like, what are you doing? You're rejecting the faith. He was like, no, I'm a Sikh in my heart. Which for them was like, no, that's not a thing. That's not like, don't pull that Christianity stuff on us. But the girls, he just kept getting asked out by all these girls, like, hey, will you come with me to do this weekend? And eventually he pieced together that what they were doing is they were inviting him to all of these ministry sanctioned activities. They were trying to convert him to Christianity. And the thing is, after a really long time, he did say, he was like, you know what? I do. Yes, I believe in Jesus. And they would ask him, they'd say, well, what about being a Sikh? He'd say, yeah, I believe in that too. And they'd say, no, you can't do that. You have to believe in Jesus only. And he was like, yeah, I believe in Jesus only. They're like, but you just said you were a Sikh. He's like, I am a Sikh. Like for him, this kind of duality, this kind of multiplicity, it was not hard for him at all. When they were like, you can't do that. Well, it was sort of a reflection of like what was impossible for them or for us. But as a non-Western, he was like, oh, I most definitely can do that. Like, this is not a challenge for me. I can have Jesus in my heart. Now, listen, I leave that to the theologians to figure out. But I'm saying that these kinds of conversations are happening. And that's why I do think it's in some ways sad that there's this Zensu, this melancholy for this receding star of Christianity. Meanwhile, people who are converting to religious faiths are outpacing births in the world. So it's not as if religion is going away anytime soon. Even if it stopped this moment, you're looking at decades and decades of believers of some type. And we don't know the full magnitude of this, because sticking with the India theme for a moment, this was just heartbreaking to me, because this woman there, she had heard the message of the gospel for the first time. And when she heard about Jesus, her immediate response was, where is he? I mean, take me to him right now. Whatever I need to pay, or to, whatever it costs, I'm good for it. Just I need to meet this man. They had to try to explain to him, well, and that gets into the idea, like, I think this is smart, that the ridicule aspect of people who are anti-theistic. I love when they say things like you're sky god, or you're flying spaghetti monster, as if by saying up or he ascended, it's language used trying to describe something like Vervaeke talking about how we get the concept of getting high. Is from these shamans who would take flight out of their body. This notion of the words mean something other than this literal, like, is he over my head? Is he on the moon? Is that where Jesus is? I mean, it isn't like that. And so I'm perplexed whenever someone ridicules in that way what the proper response is. But she believed in such a way that it was so concrete that it was quite difficult to explain in terms that someone could wrap their head around and had never heard that for the first time. And the opposite end of that is in the dorms at LSU, where I was doing my master's, I was trying to leave the parking lot one night, and I got smashed in the back by another car. And we were at a red light in the parking lot.
You were in your car?
Yes,
oh, okay,
in the car. Yeah, okay. I was rear-ended, and I was like, geez, this is bizarre. I mean, we're at a stoplight in a parking lot. So I get out, and the gentleman who is this wonderful guy, he's from China. He comes up to me, and he's saying, I'm so sorry. Looks like your car's okay. Can we leave? And I was like, no, I mean, we still have to call the police just to, clear everything, because there's, like a camera right there. We need to make sure that everything is fine, so neither one of us get in trouble. And he immediately started proselytizing, which was fascinating. And he asked me, he was like, do you go to church? And I was like, sure. That's, do you? We've never met before. And he was like, yes. And he started telling me about his faith. And I said, how did you learn about it? He said, well, someone invited me for food. And when they invited me over for food, what I learned was that, yes, I was hungry for food, but I was really hungry for something that's everlasting. And he started telling me about how, his faith was real in a way that I think juxtaposes to what Chris was saying about the receding faith. The sort of fading star of this kind of true belief in a way that's not a placebo. And that's what's hard is people are starting to do this thing where they say, well, if you get the benefits from Christianity without having to believe, it's like a placebo effect. You get the placebo effect. And listen, there is a such thing as a placebo effect. It's controlled for in every study. And there's even a such thing as studying the placebo effect, and there's still a placebo effect. It's wild. But I don't think what the placebo effect is necessarily doing is, I don't think it works the same way if you know you're lying to yourself.
Right.
And this powerful example of a student when we were going over how important it is to have controls on your studies, and what the placebo effect, how it can really obliterate a study. Because if the margin between what you're looking for as a treatment and the placebo, if it's not wide enough, then you don't get statistical significance, and boom, maybe you found something, but maybe there was like a 30% impact from just the placebo, whatever it was. This kid in our class said he had really aggressive diabetes as an adolescent, and he was enrolled in a study where they thought they might have found the cure. That's how it was presented. And so he was in the control group, but he thought he was in the treatment group. And over the course of about a year, his glucose was normalizing. So he thought, it's working, it's working. And after they told him that he was in the control group, he was devastated. And he was like, what does this mean then?
Yeah,
because immediately his glucose started acting up.
Yeah.
It's wild, but like he wasn't telling himself, this is going to work for me because I know it's a lie.
Right.
So that's maybe you can unpack that for me. Like, how's that going to work? Is the placebo effect, one reason why it works so well is because maybe that's it. Maybe it's just the fact that you're interacting and you're getting something out of the study. Even if you don't know what, maybe just the observer effect. I don't know. I haven't been able to figure it out yet.
I've done 2 conversations with Adam friended over at the Think Club channel. I did a debate last week, and yesterday we tried to watch some of the Unbelievable show with Brett Weinstein and Alistair McGrath. We didn't get through much of it because we're both talkers, but Adam is in that position where he calls himself a Christian atheist. He'll say, I'm an atheist. I'm not an agnostic. I'm an atheist. There is no God, but Christianity he thinks Christianity is the best religion because it yields the best results. And so he's not an anti-theist. He very much distinguishes himself. And he actually does debates with anti-theists. And his argument is that Christianity is good for us and good for society, and we ought to affirm it and support it and not fight about it, even though we believe that there is no God, and you can be skeptical about all sorts of other things. So it's like, okay, but I think what you recognize about the placebo effect is correct, that if you actually want to, and this again is what I deal with a lot in the last 2 years of these conversations, is that some people, there are a number of people like Adam who say Christianity has its benefits and I'm happy for it. And so I'm nice to Christians, and I might even support them doing their church thing because shoot, it's good for society. It's good for people. It's good for us, works for us. I don't believe any of it's true. Now, again, he's got certain ideas of what true means, but that's his worldview. And then I talk to other people who very much want to believe. And when they say they believe, they don't mean they act as if it's true. They mean they feel it in their heart. And because many of the benefits of being a Christian, the joy, the confidence in difficult times, these things and part of why I really like the Vervaeke course is that he gives me so much language and so many concepts I can use. I'm embedded. This is procedural knowing. This is perspectival knowing. I'm in the palm of his hand. Yes, even the propositional knowing. These propositions, when times are hard, there were times in my life when about the only way I could really continue to function as I needed to function for the sake of everyone around me was to, I think about your MP3 story, was to lay down in bed, put on some headphones, and there were a string of songs that I knew. It was my drug. It would do it for me. And whatever ways things were coming apart, I knew that if I could get into that space, I could settle down and I could have the strength to face that day. But that only works if I know I'm deeply embedded within this. And I'm enough of a 21st century person to admit that a great deal of that embedding came from Christian parents, going to church twice on Sunday, doing daily devotions, singing certain songs, living embedded within the community. And then when I needed someone, I needed to talk to someone just to tell them what had happened and to hear coming back that I'm not out of my mind, that Christian community. I needed all of that to survive. And, the prayer that you said, well, sometimes I've been in that many places because it's, okay, Lord, if all of this is just hogwash, then I'm an idiot. But then I take it to the next step and say, okay, well, if it is hogwash, what choices would I make differently in my life? And you know what? When I start going through that list, things would look pretty grim for those who are around me and love me and depend on me. If I just decided I'm just going to be a selfish SOB for the rest of my life, and I'm going to do what I want. Screw y'all. That's it. Yeah. Would I make the world better? So, there's certainly a power to, I think in many ways, Jordan Peterson is sort of, he keeps his cards very close to the vest in terms of, what he says at the edge of the bed when he's looking down into the void. But there's a limit to what faking it will get you. And so I do have a lot of compassion for those who are struggling. And I have deep respect for those for whom, and I know people like this. In fact, one just popped up on the Discord server again. This person was by their computer and God came over this person in a way, and I've known others who have had this experience in a way that they suddenly had faith. God just simply gave it to this person. And that happens too. But I'm enough of a Calvinist to know that, so this person was well educated and embedded within the Christian tradition, and they reject the faith. This person is well embedded and they held on to the faith. This person took nothing at all, and God sort of turned something in their heart, and wow, they've got faith that can move mountains. And this person wants it, and it's not coming. I cannot account for all of this diversity, but I look at the data and say, well, there it is. And I thank God for what he has given me, and I'll do my best to help everyone else. I can't do better than that.
No, and I think that's one of the things about the people that you're affiliating yourself with is there is this universality. So when, as a clinician, you learn early on when someone comes in and they tell you their deepest, darkest secret, and not only does it not kill you or send you screaming out of their room. You know, you're in this. It's
like they
weird,
expect it to.
right? It's such a.
You're bracing yourself, and they say it's like, well, that's it.
Interesting. And you know, I've got my notebook here, so I'm taking notes as you're talking. Like, you know, it. But there's this immediate sense of like we're different, but there is a quality about being human that's the same.
Yeah.
I mean, if for critics of Noam Chomsky, and they abound, let's at least give him credit for the work that he did in linguistics in showing that there's no cognitive difference in, you can take a child in China, and if they're born there and you bring them to the US and you raise them here and you speak English, they'll speak English. Any country in Africa, same thing. Like, in fact, I mean, it is really remarkable having, since communication is like my passion, but then having a baby and start babbling things, and you hear certain things that you're like, that sounds German, that sounds Japanese, and I mean it literally, like it sounds like you're like, what are you know, they're trying to figure out what the language is, and that, like, you know, the mistakes that they're making are wild at first, but then they start sort of honing in. And this guy at MIT put up a bunch of cameras all over his house when his child was born, and I think this was his dissertation, was mapping the acquisition of language based on space. And so you can hear the child like saying different things, like wildly missing the mark, but eventually over time, like as they're in the kitchen, you can start to hear the faint outlines of water. They start like getting wah wah when they're in the kitchen. Like they start to put these things together. And I didn't intend to talk about this, but in your conversation was it with Guy, where you guys were talking about the frontal lobe, and the use of our hands and enactment in the world? I can tell you that this how my wife and I met was we were working with some of the most underprivileged children in Baton Rouge post-Katrina. And it's one of the ways in which the kind of victim scale, I don't think they're victims, but what I'm saying is there's actually a place for rating people based on their suffering. And they were given additional points if they, you know, were they born to someone who was on substances when they were in utero? Like, were they exposed to substances? Yes. Then they get X amount of points. Do they have a developmental disability? Yes. Then they get, and so, you know, do they make below a certain amount? These were the criteria to get in. You needed all of those to get into the program. And so, you know, dealing with those kids, you watch them, how they learn. And even my daughter, like, the learning has dramatically picked up as she's also learned how to start to do things with it, like embodied cognition. It's not just here, it's everywhere. You don't, she didn't start saying like a little words until she was able to start like pointing at something. So what's that? You know, I mean, she can't say like, what's that? But she can point at something, and, you know, you tell her what it is, and then she can start to like echo it. So, you know, we've seen it in about, I guess we had 160 kids, and my wife was she was not a kid person at the time. So it was a real rude awakening for her, because it was just screaming, you know, 8 hours a day. It was just, you know, some baby somewhere was going to be screaming. But yeah, there is this concern about a lot of the parables in the Bible. A lot of the stories, they're they're centered around this agricultural, agrarian type society and cultural norms, seed time and harvest. I was talking to, students that are from places like New York when they come here, and we were talking in the office and things of that nature. We share some stories about our lives, and they're like, "Have you ever seen a cow before?" Like, yes, I have seen a cow before. That would be like, for me, that would be like asking them if they'd ever seen a computer before.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so we were planting something a couple years ago, and I told my wife, like, I was helping my dad. It was just like a garden that he was planting, and I was like, it strikes me as we're doing this, there are so many people, like this notion of there being a seed time and harvest, and there's seasons in your life, time to live, to prosper, to die. All of that is very, it's deep, it's in our past, and I don't know that there's a way of excavating that and reclaiming that without, and maybe that's one of the reasons why we're kind of at a bottleneck, where we need sort of like whatever the digital version of that is. I mean, I guess the Matrix is the Bible for some people in that way, but I don't know how to communicate what those parables would look like, because you start messing with those narratives that have been around for so long. I don't know where you go. But maybe that's part of the problem, is people are fundamentally disconnected from that way of being in the world. And so that's what we were going to talk about, the Axial Age. And I heard in, I guess were you in Australia where you were giving that talk? And so, like, where you left off was saying, like, I'm going to put my bet on this. I'd love for you to say a little bit about that, about what I'm pondering is there such thing as Pankaj Mishra said about himself, he was irredeemably secularized. He has a deep appreciation for faith, and he was raised by parents who believe in a worldview where God is sort of suffused throughout. But he himself, he says, is irredeemably secularized. He can no longer think those thoughts after them. It's not a live possibility for him anymore to be a person of faith. And so what is this axial stage, and how does that relate to possibly where we are now?
Well, I mean, that the description that you just gave of this individual, I think, is where a number of people are. And so Christopher's longing for that receding sun, that's why this moment is so poetic. So I've done a lot of learning since I was in Australia. That was back in April. And I think in many ways, the great final chapters of the book of Revelation are the end of the Axial Age, where there's a new heaven and a new earth, and the new earth descends dressed as a bridegroom. And the cry goes out, now the dwelling of God is with man, with mankind. And the Barfieldian idea that this ripped apart participation that in a sense had to happen. You can see that in the story of the garden, where there's a flaming sword that separates the man and the woman. They can no longer enter. C.S. Lewis, in his book The Discarded Image, does a beautiful job of laying out the medieval world and the medieval model, which is a discarded image and can't be you can't climb back into it. And so in that sense, Vervaeke's point about nostalgia is correct. But the hope of the last chapters of the book of Revelation are that heaven and earth are once again one. Now, we don't know what that means. C.S. Lewis tries to portray it in some very imaginative ways in The Last Battle, but it seems to me the plight of the Muslim convert who lives embedded in a Muslim land and the plight of the secularist are not that far from each other.
I would agree with that.
And the church is going to have to, as the church always has, so St. Augustine, who of course was responsible for the merging of Christianity and Neoplatonism, as Augustine himself was fleeing from the wild Manichaean ideas. His mother was a Donatist, and Augustine became a Catholic. Now, the Donatists were a group of Christians that had endured the sporadic Roman persecutions faithfully, and they had refused to denounce their Lord for the sake of their lives. But many priests had denounced in order to save their skins. And so the Donatists basically said, if you caved, you're not welcome here, because we stood firm and we held the line, at many of us at the risk and cost of our lives. And so we're faithful and you're not. And this was the Donatist controversy, and this was raging during Augustine's time. And Augustine became a Catholic, which meant that he became part of the church that said, yeah, those priests failed. Yeah, they shouldn't have, but they can be let back into the church, and in some cases, even into the priesthood. The church has been dealing with challenges, I think, as difficult as the one we face today. And I deeply appreciate the anxiety that someone like Bret Weinstein has with respect to looking at nuclear weapons, looking at environmental threats. I mean, I'm not a climate denier. It just seems to me that the more CO2 we pump into the air, the more we'll get into the waters. It's going to have an effect. That doesn't seem like rocket science to me. But some people say now is not the time to panic. And I always say, well, when exactly is the time to panic? How much good has panicking done us as a community? But shouldn't we prefer to have our faculties engaged? And so I understand Bret Weinstein's skepticism about the way forward for humanity. But if you read church history, that's pretty much a constant state. And whether it's a global annihilation or Gad Sad in response to the little girl that was making her speech at the UN about the climate, made the point that when he was growing up in Lebanon and his parents were kidnapped and he was in fear of his mother being raped and himself being killed, all around the world, childhood is ripped from people. In fact, if anybody had a childhood that's intact, you are by far the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
And whether that challenge is a global challenge or an individual challenge, we face it. And one of my favorite C.S. Lewis essays is Life in the Atomic Age, where in 1946, people were freaking out, or 48, I don't remember which, about the Russians getting the bomb. And C.S. Lewis basically wades in and says, excuse me, what kind of world did you think you were living in?
Right.
So I you know, in times like this, people are like, well, why, how can you maintain faith in such a time as this? And I think, how can you live without it? Because okay, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe, in fact, I'm sure I'm wrong about lots and lots and lots of things. But the path you show me, I don't see that you're really offering anything to me that's better than what I've been given. So I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And I recommend it to you because in my mind, yes, I understand about the acidification and the warming of the oceans. And I'm deeply skeptical about humanity's capacity to address these things politically and communally, which is obviously the shape that they will need to be addressed in heavy CO2 producers like India and China and Africa. Oh, I'm fully conscious of these challenges, and I'm not really skeptical that they will have significant consequences for life in this planet. But Christians survived the Black Death. Christians survived all kinds of things. And I'm not ready to pitch it because of these contemporary scares.
Yeah, I mean, the catacombs alone, you bringing up that, you know, going there and just seeing like, this is how you live. This is, you know, if you're a Christian, your forebears crawling around in caves, and they'd have communion here and bury a person right there. I mean, it's just, it doesn't even make sense. So in that regard, right? I mean, we have it so much better in some ways, but that's why I'm starting to wonder if there's a line, like an equilibrium somewhere, and if you tilt it too far in one of two directions, it throws everything off. And I say that because you would think that the healthiest, longest lasting marriages and relationships would be ones where just get along and they all say nice things to one another all the time. And I was once, my wife and I, we were interviewed one time, and they asked us, they said, how do you compliment one another? And of course I knew what they meant, but I said, well, we compliment one another by saying nice things to one another. But in truth, the research shows that I don't know, maybe we're weird animals in that we seem to do better with a little bit of low level misery. Like, we don't want everything always to be like a sycophant. Oh, you're the best. You know, if you're telling the truth, then sometimes, yes, I screw up. Like, I mess up. I'm not perfect. And my wife is a witness of that. And vice
and your
versa.
Kids will be too.
Yeah, yes. This, no doubt. You know, everything. So no more Joe Rogan for me. You know, it's going to be a long time before I can watch Joe Rogan again, because she's starting to like make sounds, you know, so it'll be, can't listen to that. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I want everyone to know that I know about myself, is that I really don't know how we got to the place where maybe it's the last battle where I think my youngest brother read it. I think it's there where one of the characters, although he's not part of the Aslan crew, when he's judged, it's, well, based on where you are, based on what you did, based on your life, how close to that code did you live? And so, I mean, there are lots of people. Was Lewis a universalist? Was, you know, I'm not. It's not interesting to me. But you're citing him for his response to living in the atomic age. I started juxtaposing the abolition of man and that hideous strength. So that hideous strength is, a lot of people do not like that book, but it's his fictionalized account of the abolition of man. And so I put those Lewis and Ray Kurzweil together in conversation. And this is kind of what launched my career and even the technology in the Tao is biotechnology in the Tao is putting these two in conversation. If you read Kurzweil and you read that hideous strength, I have like paragraphs that are, you couldn't tell who was writing which one. It's just because this notion that like, they were all myths before, but now we're gonna usher in the real thing. This is where I get hesitant and I worry, because just a simple example like you used of people being judged for something they said or did in college. Let us get to a world where colleagues of mine at Wake Forest, where they're talking about regenerative medicine, that survival of the fittest is going to become very economic. I mean, it always has been in a certain sense, whatever the economy was at the time, but we're getting there in a way where it's like coming down to dollars and cents. If you can access these particular biotechnologies that allow you to live long enough so that you can live much longer, the argument is that, Kurzweil's argument is that you could live long enough to potentially live forever. And you can have all of it that those pie in the sky religions, you had to die to get the good stuff. We can get it now. And so what happens the problem is we can't even live a normal lifespan anymore without things that were not deemed wrong at the time coming, so you can never live long enough to be good. That's sort of a paper that I'm working on right now, which is how are we going to negotiate this in an age where people have extended lifespans? And the offer, listen, it's so powerful. To quote Richard Wever again, like there's this tyrannizing image right now that myself, as like the older end of millennials, man, there is a lot of stock that we put in technoscience, biotech, getting us to the point where, you could have a bionic heart, or, I don't know about mind uploading and all of those things. And I don't even know if that would be something you would want to do if you could do it. But I'm saying there's a part of me that finds that our culture is so saturated with it, and we're trying to come to terms with what this means, that there's sort of like one foot in the biotech and science camp, hoping that we're going to be able to defy death, while also knowing simultaneously that at least in our lifetime, that's not going to happen unless there's some astounding breakthrough. And if there is an astounding breakthrough, you might end up with what Paul Virilio called, like, there will come a day when there will no longer come a day. Like you could create a technology to get yourself there that's so powerful that it makes an atom bomb look, like a cap gun. And so I don't know how. Again, a lot of the pastors that I ask these questions to, when I interview them, I say, what are you going to talk? How are you going to engage your congregation about the crunch that they're about to go through? With, if you go to major retail stores right now, even the sweepers are now machines. Like what's the cognitive capacity for a human being? It varies, of course, but my argument is we're playing a kind of economic game of Jenga. The argument is that, well, if if you're not doing that menial stuff, then you're going to be able to educate yourself, and you'll be doing Cal 4 in your 60s, and you can become a programmer too. It's like, listen, people need to hear this right now. Like, you need to wake up to the fact that there's nothing that a human can do at this point that a machine won't be able to do. And I mean in terms of work that we know of yet. There are already robotic pastors, but there will be, a neural net that can cite every verse and pull every trend together. There was this article several years ago that Wired put out called Big Data and the End of Theory. And it's, once you start getting enough data, yes, you need parameters and you need to know how to look at the data. But this famous story, of following trends, Target was able to accurately predict that an adolescent was pregnant before her family was aware of it. And they were tracking her unique moves. Like, what was she spending her money on? What was she looking at online? And so based on all of the aggregated data, they sent out like a flyer to her about, baby clothing being on sale. And her father was like, why are you getting this? And as it turns out, she was pregnant, but the algorithm was good enough even at that point, that given enough data, we like to think, well, we're so unique. But there's even room for that, saying, well, this is what a human being looks like when they're unique. This is what they're doing. This is what a person who's trying to be random looks like. It doesn't matter if you understand the randomness. It's that you understand that that's what it looks like when they're being random. And so you just sort of pull that in, and the level of prediction that you can make. I feel like if we don't have adequate responses to some of these questions, I fear that we are going to lose some of the people that they want to have a higher level conversation about. Some of this stuff's coming. It's already here.
Yeah.
And the economic crunch. I know you said in your father's church where you grew up, it was with predominantly African Americans, and so that you sort of are acculturated to a particular view of the world. And when someone sees you, they might not think, hey, look, I have more in common with these people up north who may not look like me than I do with the guy on the other end of the screen. And so what was that like for you, and how did that inform the way that you live your life now?
Well, the funny thing about growing into something is that you don't know any other way. And so there's a blessed naivete of being on the inside. And in many ways, you can only see it through other people's eyes. I would like to say something, though, about, what you were just talking about in terms of the possibility of far extending life, the reality of many jobs that are fairly mindless, perhaps being replaced. As a pastor, I spend time with full-grown men who, for one reason or another, are almost unemployable. And I'll tell you something about these men. Their days are long, and they are looking for some way to just get from one day to the next, because they are doing time. And the idea of, and a lot of them, I look at what they eat, and I look at what they smoke, and I look at how they live, and I think any doctor looking at them is going to say they're going to have an early stroke or heart attack, and there might be some mercy to that. So, oh, you should quit smoking and you should start eating right. I'm thinking, first of all, telling them that would be pointless. But besides that, they're doing time now because they have their own sort of meaning crisis, which isn't anywhere near as philosophical or esoteric as a whole bunch of people who are a lot more employable in the country. I also spend, again, part of what has happened in our culture is that people intersect with certain high intensity populations. Let's say if you're a doctor treating diabetes, well, these are the people you spend time with. If you're, and so a lot of older people, a lot of doctors, healthcare workers, nursing home employees, they'll spend time with people once they hit a certain level, and then boom, then they're in this institutional strata. And so those doctors and nurses and workers get a pretty intense look at people in that place. As someone like a pastor, which is sort of analogous to a family member, you tend to see people going through much longer periods of time. So I've been in this church 22 years, and you watch people who die young. My sister died at 53, suddenly of a heart attack, completely unexpected. So I watch her husband, my nieces and nephew, her coworkers, people in her church, her friends. You watch that. And obviously in a case like this, it's like, gosh, wish we had known, and maybe there could have been intervention and that death prevented, so on and so forth. So you watch that end of it. And you watch people on the other end of it. And more we have people living into their 80s, not such an exceptional thing. Going into their 90s, not such an exceptional thing. And you talk to them about their lives, and going to funeral after funeral for their friends. And no matter how you stretch this thing, there's likely going to continue to be a curve. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the healthy stay healthy longer, and the various systems that break down. I watch people age and die fairly frequently. And, so you have all these systems that are in distress, and the doctors are able to sort of keep them all going. And then one system in particular, that one goes, and then, okay, then you lose, then they die. And so you watch this, and you begin to recognize that long life can be a blessing, but the number of factors involved in that are innumerable. Yeah. And so, it's so ironic that on one hand, we look for technology as a way to push death back because we don't want death. And at the same time, life expectancy in the United States is declining because of suicide.
Right.
So
yes.
So then I'll ask people questions like, well, tell me what life is, because that isn't an obvious or easy answer, because obviously those people who were committing suicide thought that life is not a welcome thing. And so, we have these conversations as a culture, and sometimes I listen to people talk and think, have you never met a human being? Do you not know what they're like?
Yeah.
Do you not live with them or listen to them or observe them carefully? Because the kind of world you seem to be portraying as advisable, I think there's going to be a diversity of opinion on these things. And a lot of what you might discover, you might not like. And we've seen this all over the place, as for the last couple of 100 years at accelerating rates, technology has been disturbing, dislocating, and disrupting various elements of our lives. And we've been asking people to change at increasing rates. And certain groups of people get to the point of saying, well, not going to change anymore. and they step off, but the world won't let them. I mean, this is what we're watching. And so I'm always skeptical about someone's grand plan to make everything better. And because nobody's that smart. And the big data questions, they're scary too.
Well, right, because you've made the point that we're not transparent to ourselves, which means we're easily hackable. You know, we can, I mean, just the,
for better and for worse.
Yeah, for better and for worse, right. I mean, as a pastor, I mean, you're trying to get mind viruses out there where you're trying to get this idea lodged, and hopefully it moves, the distance from the head to the heart. But I love what you said about that these people facing this very real existential crisis, because that's what got me so fascinated with before I wanted to do PhD work in like a applied field like communications. I wanted to know what almost every kind of person I could encounter, what their narratives were like. And so I definitely got that during clinicals. I mean, and traveling all over the world. Like you really do get this sense that we are deeply tied and embedded in a shared nature. There's something that it means to be human. And there's something that it means to come in contact with things that alter that state. And so I just can't for the life of me figure out where the incommensurability is coming from, that as things keep, in one sense, getting better, at the same time, as you said, more people than at any other time in history, it would appear, are choosing to end their lives, or they're reaching for opioids that at least at minimum, it takes away your agency. And it is a way of a potentially slow suicide, in the sense that you lose everything. You lose yourself, even if you don't like complete a suicide in the way that someone, say, with a gun might, or nearer to your area, the jumping off the San Francisco bridge. I mean, that was, that happened, and it just happened year after year until finally, something was done. But I mean, what could be more grotesque than being fed this message that, well, your GDP is doing better than anyone else's, things are looking up, and yet you don't feel that. And I'm not sure what that is. Is it that, I mean, we have this whole book about how great life is right now and how much progress we're making. And, I'm not here to sling arrows at any scholar. The data is there. They put forward a particular narrative. But I'm saying it isn't all the story, because in our state, in the state of Florida, wrap your head around this if you can, and help me make sense of it, because nobody has been able to make sense of this. When I wrote this $12 million grant for the state of Florida, at the time that I wrote it, if you were to take children and youth with the most extreme emotional disturbances, and you were to make them a demographic, they would be the third largest minority group in the state. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands. And so when I talked to the director at Substance Abuse and Mental Health at our state office, I said, listen, what do you think it would have been like if you were in the room circa 2006, 2007, and you could see the market crash coming? Do you think you would have wanted to have known that so you could try to get ahead of it? because all of the best models that we have is about this pyramid, and the top percentile are the highest utilizers of behavioral health care. So if you're able to get to them and treat them early enough, that money could be diverted to prevention efforts, right? I was like, we're past that point. What we're doing, yes, we have great treatment options and modalities out there, and they help. Maybe even some of them offer tentative curative properties. But it's tantamount to taking that young person who's been shot in the gut, one of the most lethal injuries you can get. The best surgeon in the world flies in, saves their life. You send them back into the same community, and they come right back with the same gun. So that's what we're doing. Our communities have become inhospitable to life in many ways. So I agree with Pinker's general thesis that things are getting better, but it's not hard to get better than the 20th century. We killed millions of people. It's not harder to get better than Stone Age and Bronze Age people. And so we see this almost straight line up, linear, almost exponential growth economically, but no one can tell me why the problem is scaling like it is. And so I was just like 5-alarm fire. I was like, we're already 2007 pre-market crash, and I'm telling you, we don't get out ahead of this. There's not going to be a way of getting out ahead of it, because you won't have enough clinicians to address the problems. What do we do about this incommensurability? Yeah. Is it just that life is about getting commodities at cheaper prices? Is that how we're going to measure what it means to live a better life? Because I think that we've rejected community at an extreme cost. Just the toll that it takes from loneliness, alienation, and these gentlemen that you're talking about, that's just a devastating book right there that you could write, just doing time.
Yeah.
And or a life sentence. Yeah. Sentence to life. Yeah. Man, that's rough. And I'm going to stay up tonight thinking about that long and hard. Not that I haven't dealt with that, but that it's at a scale now that there's just something deeply wrong at the core here somewhere. And that's what's scaring me, is this, if people can't see that there's a meaning crisis when you go to the developing world, and if you go to the right country, you'd have to take a gun and put it to somebody's head to end their life. This man that worked with us, that did a lot of our engineering for the data platforms that we used, his name is Signoni, and he's an amazing man. His family, all of them massacred in Sudan. I heard one Rwandan woman telling a story about them running from these guys that infiltrated their village, and she and her mom were running beside one another, and her mom was shot, and it took her head off. And for a split second, her body, just the momentum carried her forward a little bit. Like, what a horrific image. The stories of some of those individuals, like 8, 9 of them, staying in a closet that's like 3 by 3 for days and days and weeks and months on end. You take that and you juxtapose it to, you can almost have anything you want here.
Yeah.
In the United States. If you have just enough money, I just can't make that make sense. I can't square that yet as to, is it about resiliency? in other people and kind of a deracination in us? Are we just deracinated? We've just given up on fighting for life? Or is there something about once you get to a certain point technologically and in terms of your civilization where so many things work right that you have almost a frictionless existence? And so these little things that annoy you, they, you know, we now even call them first world problems. It just seems to me that we don't have the same kind of fortitude at this point. And I'm not trying to exoticize the other, you know, all of these terms that'll be thrown at me. I'm not doing that. There's none of that, because it's hard living, and you know something about that. So our final words here, just, do you have any thoughts on how Pinker can be both right and yet the phenomenological experience of thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, and it's getting younger? You know, that's what scares me the most. Is like it's third graders that are getting expelled at a higher rate than high schoolers. So how do you make sense of that?
So at the end of the Brett Weinstein, Alistair McGrath conversation, Brett is talking about, what we need to do is create it. We need to get rid of all these conflicts and then, you know, set about to give everybody the best life possible for whatever sustainable number of people are for the planet. And it's like, what does that look like? You know, now that, you know, when we weren't getting enough calories, we dreamed of, you know, the Hard Rock Candy Mountain, that song from the Depression. We dreamed of that. Now, boy, we don't want to see that Hard Rock Candy Mountain because we don't want to have all that sugar. We do not, and some things getting better, absolutely. But none of that addresses the mystery that we are to ourselves. It just simply doesn't. And again, as a pastor, I mentioned, probably shouldn't have said it. I say things I shouldn't say. I mentioned in my sermon that as a pastor, a lot of what I do is, actually I mentioned it at a funeral, a lot of what I do is listen to complaints. So now when my members of the church come up and talk to me, they're like, oh, I was about to complain about someone. It's now they've seen me see them. And many of the metrics that we use to assume a quality of life are simply not as reliable as we imagine. And my best illustration of this comes from a John Ortberg book, and he got it from someone else, because we pastors are thieves, and when we hit a good story, we shop it as long and hard as we can. It's the story that I've told a number of times of Mabel, this woman in a nursing home whose face was eaten by cancer, and it was a crappy nursing home. And if you're a pastor, you wind up in crappy nursing homes, the kind that, you know, Medicaid will pay for and no more. And so, you know, the margins are thin in these places. And she's sitting there and no one is around her. Nobody is visiting her. And this one young pastor, you know, trying to do a good deed, and he's going to go, going to give her a flower. And she says, no, give it to someone. I can't see it and I can't smell it, but give it to someone who really needs it. I'm really doing quite well. And he begins talking to her, and he realizes that this woman is filled with joy and peace and happiness. And here he's this seminary student who's, you know, fighting to get papers and hoping to get a church job and trying to make his marriage work and maybe have kids and all that. And, you know, he's there to be
it's getting hot in here, Pastor.
Be a pastor to someone. And he begins to realize that he has everything in the world to learn from this woman. And so, okay. we're not, I often think of the fact that here in the year 2019, we have no idea what to feed a human being, even though all of us have been eating all of our lives, and we've been keeping records about what people eat, and yet it's an absolute fever on the internet to know what to eat. And Jordan Peterson and his daughter are, especially his daughter, working with people. I mean, this is the human condition, and we improve things, and God bless these improvements. But I just finished listening to the podcast Hardcore History. Someone recommended this series of episodes on the First World War, and you listen to those episodes, and wow, what these people endured. Human beings are amazing. Human beings are miserable.
Right.
These things don't change, and the situations do, and we know it. So you've got Howard Hughes. Yeah, I read a biography of his a few years ago, and it's just such a sad life for an amazingly wealthy man who inherited all of this money because his father figured out how to do a drill bit right at the right time for oil exploration in the 20th century, and you would think that this guy, he slept with the most beautiful women that the world longed for, via Hollywood screens, and he had all the money in the world, and he had political connections, and he had everything, and he died, a recluse with jars of his own urine surrounding him.
That's awful, and I'm laughing because of it doesn't even seem believable.
Yeah.
I mean that. So is it that we have sort of cultural anhedonia? You think when you see ice cream, oh, I get a scoop of ice cream and it tastes so good. So a tub of ice cream is
supposed to be better.
Right.
Yeah.
And it ends up not. And so I know a lot of the tech people now they're into, intermittent fasting, going on longer fasts, because caloric restriction, we know, can increase longevity. And so I'm wondering if some of that, we need something like that for culture. We need something like a fast, but I don't know what that thing is to allow us to get healthy. And so I appreciate so much your time. I know we didn't get to everything, but we didn't solve all the world problems.
We didn't
this evening, but
crap, I can't check that off my list.
I really appreciate it, and I think what you're doing, if you calculate it out, most people's careers are about 80,000 hours. So you think about the amount of thousands of views at this point. It's got to be staggering to think the amount, the lives that you've been able to reach already, and then in perpetuity, because we know you make only evergreen materials. So you're putting it out there, and so it really is, this kind of crazy public service that, in a way, I'm still wrestling with the promises and the perils that this kind of technological world that we live in, it can bring, because it does bring people like you to the many, and lots of people need to hear what you're saying. And so I really appreciate it and hope that you keep at it.
Well, thank you. That's very gracious. We'll see what all of this produces. I'm again, it's that scale question, because what is the difference between helping one person and helping 1 million people? The suffering, C.S. Lewis makes this comment, suffering doesn't add up like money adds up.
No, it does not.
And so, you help one person, you help 1 million people. I think about Henry Nouwen, who, had a publishing career that many pastors would die for, lecturing at Harvard. He'd write these beautiful books and people would all fall over themselves. And he decides to spend the last 10 years of his life at L'Arc caring for one disabled human being. And of course, what that meant was wiping his butt, cleaning up his messes, probably spending hours a day semi-bored. I mean, you and your wife will get a lesson in the mind-numbing reality of caring even for a small child that you dearly love, when the first time she does it, it's so cute, and then she just keeps doing it, and it's like, oh, put on a podcast, I'm going out of my mind, you watch the kid, I need to get out of the house. So life is this mysterious thing. And again, as a Christian, I derive some comfort in the fact that I know I can't figure it out. And in a sense, I know I don't have to. And all of these questions of salvation and perdition, they're not finally up to me. And what I can find comfort in is that the kind of God who would be capable of making a world as amazing as this one is the one who will finally determine what is right. And that's far better than I can ever do. And so I can rest on that belief. And it's my joy. Peterson keeps making the comment, it's got to be uphill. It's never in finally arriving that we actually have the sense of meaning. And so God has given us a lot of uphill that we can find meaning in pursuing. And so why not do what we can? So that's how I see it.
Well, I mean, I know that as you've asked before, people that are contacting you, how many academics, and this is sort of what's gotten me off my butt in a certain sense, how many in my academic career, how many people, I mean, because they knew my background as a clinician, maybe they would come and talk to me about their story. But what I'm saying is, how many people reach out to you and just say, oh, look, I heard this podcast, or I heard, I watched you talk to some other person side by side, on a screen. And it helped keep me in the game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wild. And I mean, I appreciate the fact that people like you are paving the way, and it's allowing space for yokels like myself to come in and say, all right, here's a piece of this conversation about the meaning crisis that I'm really fascinated with and want to figure out. Because when you talk about scale, the book Dignity, I mean, it could have been written about, people that I know. So I want the Pinkers, the Vervekis, everybody from that end of the spectrum down to, my parents would probably kill me for telling this story, but it's just a truth that my grandfather was great at farming. But one time my grandmother asked him, she said, what is an oral surgeon? And she was being serious. She didn't know what it was. Yeah. And he thought for a minute and he said, that's a doctor that talks to you. I mean, he was considered very well educated for his time. He, went to like the 11th grade. So for that place and that time, that was incredible. And so I feel as deeply for them, for the tribe that I came from, as I do for the people who say this thing's receding. And I look at almost everyone that I've ever known in my whole life is already dead, because I was embedded in a church community where there were lots of elders, brothers and sisters so-and-so, and they're gone. And so I'm looking around like, geez, I mean, I didn't know that the front lines were this close. Yeah. So it really is. I mean, it's getting thin. Yeah. And so I really have a deep empathy for both ends of the spectrum here, because I find myself like uncomfortably in the middle. And so I hope that that you are able to continue to engage in kinds of conversations that you are. And I think it gives other people courage when you say what you just said. Like, I'm not smart enough to figure this out, but I'm pretty sure I know someone who is. And for me, as I've said, it's a prayer. Most theologians and pastors probably would have a major problem with it, but just being like, God, look, I got all my eggs in your basket. So if you're not real, man, I am screwed, because I'm also, Peterson is right. And I want your audience to know that I have no personal qualms with him. So whenever I said like whether or not he has hubris in his life, I'm just saying some people think that he is, because he ventures into areas where he's maybe not an expert. Some people consider that arrogant. I don't. He's way smarter than me. He's doing his thing. Yep. So yep. I have no qualms with him, but I think as a model of picking up your cross, carrying it daily. I've watched tons of your videos at this point, and this may not feel like a heavy cross, but I feel like scheduling wise, it's turning into a cross, and it's maybe a little more. It doesn't have as many thorns on it, but you never know what the weight the other person's carrying. Can you imagine how many people reach out to that man?
Yeah. I can't comprehend. I see just a tiny little bit of it. And
right.
Adam was like, if you do these things, your channel will grow. And it's like, I don't know if I want my channel to grow. There's only so much one person can do. So yeah, I feel for the man. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure I cleaned that up from the last, because I made that comment and some people took it as if I had, beef with him. I was just like, I'm not politically motivated. And so if someone finds that particular piece of his shtick offensive or wrong or whatever, that's for them. I'm just saying, on the whole, he's helping more people move in the right direction, adopt good ideas, get rid of some bad ideas. And for all of those people that have a problem with it, go look at Eliezer Yudkowsky's Less Wrong. I mean, he's a rationalist, he's an atheist, he's probably one of the harshest critics of religion that you'll ever encounter, but he is a polymath. And the whole idea of being less wrong and using Bayesian updates, it's an important concept. And so the fact that people are walking away less wrong, for me, makes the world a better place. And I need that, because now I have a baby. So I need more people to be better people. Yeah.
So that it's a safer world for her.
Absolutely.
All right, Pastor.
All right, Kyle. This was fun.
Thanks so much, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. I think people will enjoy this.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.